It didn't work out that way. From that glorious opening day, I took a ride on a roller coaster. One moment I was on top, winning games. The next I was hurtling down, wondering if anything would ever stop my fall. The trouble was, my shoulder hurt. Whenever I tried to throw hard, it would kill me. I got very frustrated. To get beat by a batter was one thing, but to get beat by a sore shoulder was another. Finally, in May, I was put on the disabled list. Eventually, I had surgery. While I was recuperating, Atlee and I hung around a lot together. Atlee was on me about the lump on my arm. Man, that lump is getting bigger, he'd say. He wanted me to see another doctor, but I wasn't thinking about it. I was much more concerned about my shoulder. Despite the operation, my shoulder still hurt, and I wasn't able to pitch. The team wasn't doing well either. Finally, near the end of the season, I asked if I could just go home to Ohio. The Giants said I could. By then, the lump on my arm was clearly visible, big as a golf ball, and as hard as one, too. 6 months had gone by since my last exam. It was time to get the lump checked again. So just before leaving San Francisco, I went for another MRI. A few days later, the doctor called me in Ohio and said I'd better see a doctor near my home. So Janice and I drove up to Cleveland for an appointment. Neither of us was very worried. We thought this was just a routine check on a minor problem. We were sitting in a small examining room, talking quietly together, when we heard people shuffling around outside the door. Apparently, Dr. Bergfeld had arrived. He was looking at the film from my MRI. We knew, because we heard the film flapping into position over the lights. Then we heard four distinct words from one deep voice. Look at that tumor. Tumor? No one had ever used that word before. They had talked about a lump, not a tumor. Tumor was a scary word. Hearing it, we felt as though the entire floor fell away. I looked at Janice. She looked at me. I could see from her eyes that she was shocked and scared. I think we better pray, she said. Yeah, I said. We better pray right now. I got off the examining table and sat on a chair beside her. We held hands. Dear God, I said, we don't know what's happening. We don't know what this means. Help us to face whatever comes. Then Dr. Bergfeld came in. I felt at home with Dr. Bergfeld right away. Can't think of anybody I'd rather meet just moments after hearing the word tumor. He is a big man with a hearty, booming voice and a jolly manner. He has a way of making you feel that everything is in good hands. He told me right away, Dave, this may be a tumor. I'm going to send you up to see an oncologist. When he said oncologist, my heart skipped a beat. I knew that an oncologist is a cancer doctor. So we went to see Dr. Mostar. He said, I recommend you to have a biopsy on this. I don't think we're dealing with a high grade malignant tumor, but we can't be sure. I wanted to scream. What do you mean you can't be sure? You're talking about my life. He thought it was a kind of tumor that wouldn't spread to other parts of my body. If so, it wasn't deadly. But we needed to take a biopsy and find out. A biopsy is when the doctor cuts off a tiny piece of your tumor so that they can test it. It didn't take long, maybe half an hour, and it didn't hurt. Afterwards, the doctor talked to us again. He seemed optimistic. He drew a picture to show us where the tumor was growing on my deltoid muscle. The deltoid is the large muscle that wraps over the top of your shoulder. The doctor said the tumor was near the muscle that attaches to the large bone of my upper arm, the humerus bone. He was reasonably certain that it wasn't a deadly kind of tumor, but I can't be 100% sure, he said. The days following the biopsy were quiet ones. The baseball season had ended and the playoffs were about to begin, but I was living in a world far away from that. Baseball didn't matter much now that my life was in danger. I didn't have much to say. I sat quietly and filled my eyes with my wife and my children. I couldn't get enough of being near them. It was an anxious time, waiting, just waiting to hear the news. When the phone rang, I always wondered whether I would hear the results. Yet it was a good kind of anxiety, too. Just looking at Janice reminded me how much I loved her. I stared at her and stared at my kids, thinking they were the most beautiful sight in the entire universe. Some nights when Tiffany and Jonathan were asleep, I would go into their room and listen to them slowly breathing. I thought of how often I didn't have time for them. Many times when they had asked me to play ball, I told them, I'm busy reading right now. Give me 10 minutes. And then the phone would ring and I would never get to play with them. During those days of waiting, I did play ball or whatever else they wanted to play. I also thought about where I would go when I died. I knew God would welcome me to heaven. That meant a lot to me. One thought that did not enter my mind, I never thought, why me? I didn't feel sorry for myself. I wasn't wondering why God had treated me so unfairly. I know that those thoughts do come to people who face cancer because many people have asked me about them. I don't claim any credit for myself, but I didn't have those thoughts. Janice didn't either. We just didn't think that way. To explain why, I'd have to take you back to my days as a minor league baseball player.